Hello guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to transition to the data visualization stage of a data science workflow. Data visualization is especially important in communicating discovered relationships in data to non-data experts. It also plays an important role in exploring data and gaining insight from the data that can guide a choice of statistical models. Over time, R has developed three core plotting systems that vary from each other slightly and are useful for achieving a few different goals for data visualization. In this course, we are going to introduce two of these three plotting systems, the base plotting system and the ggplot2 plotting system. These two plotting systems can pretty much satisfy all your data visualization needs. The first system that I'll talk about is the base plotting system. The base plotting system is the oldest system in R. It came with the graphics package, which is automatically loaded in a standard installation of R. The graphics package provides some basic but powerful functions, as shown here. These functions allow us to produce the usual range of standard statistical plots, including scatter plots, box plots, histograms, bar plots, pie charts, and basic 3D plots. If we don't bother to create more aesthetic graphics, the base plotting system is very handy for us to do quick plotting for data exploration. The most important plotting function in R's base graphics is the plot function. In many situations, this function provides the simplest way to produce a complete plot. And the plot function is generic, which means it can cope with data in different formats and produce different types of plots accordingly. For instance, if the plot function takes two numeric vectors, it produces a scatter plot that plots the values in the latter argument against those in the former argument. If it takes a factor and a numeric vector in order, a box plot will be produced, with each box showing the distribution of the numerical values on each level of this vector. And when it takes only a single argument, depending on the class of the argument, it creates either a scatter plot to show the values of the argument at every index, or a bar plot to show counts for every level of the argument. And if we pass a whole data frame to it, the resulting figure will plot all variables against each other. Next, let's consider this plain scatter plot as a starting point and see how we can use a variety of style options to customize its style. 50 data points used in this plot are simulated by a cubic polynomial plus a random term. Here, I use an interactive app to demonstrate most of the style options supported by the plot function and display the corresponding code in this cell. Let's first take a look at the plot style drop-down menu. Choices in this drop-down menu correspond to examples of valid arguments to the type parameter of the plot function. And this parameter allows us to create several variations on a scatter plot. For example, we can choose whether we want a plot that contains only markers that pinpoint locations of data points, or want a line plot to depict the trends and changes among these data points, or both. This parameter also allows us to create a histogram-like vertical lines, as shown here. So what we actually did is to set this type parameter to different style characters. And we can also choose what marker to use by supplying the PCH argument. This can either be an integer code in 0 through 18 for one of the set of graphic symbols, or a single character you want to use as markers. By changing this slider, I supply different integer codes to change the markers used in this plot. We can also change the types of lines that connect these data points. Line types can either be specified as an integer with, for example, 1 for solid line, 2 for dashed line, 3 for dotted line, and so on, or as a character string for any of the line types like solid, dashed, dotted, etc. And we can also control the line width, which corresponds to this LWD, short for line width argument. And we can use the main keyword to customize the title of this plot. And there are two additional keywords which allow us to customize the labels used for the y-axis and x-axis. For example, if we would like to change these two labels to a set of new labels like x variable and y variable, we can do so by simply set these two keywords to the corresponding values in a call to the plot function. And the plot function also allows us to control the color of markers by this color keyword. It can be 1 through 8 for basic colors. Or an RGB hex code, or a string for any of the 657 available named colors. If I specify multiple colors at the same time, they will be recycled and alternately applied to these points. You can download an RMD file from Canvas, which contains the code for creating all the interactive apps used in these notes. Knit it on your own computer and play with these interactive apps. The plot function also allows us to control the size of text used in a plot and specify it in terms of the scale factors. For this type of scale factors, values between 0 and 1 will shrink text, while values larger than 1 will expand text. And there are a family of CEX parameters that allow us to exercise fine controls on the size of text drawn on different parts of a plot. For example, CEX main controls the size of text in the plot title. CEX lamp controls the size of text drawn as axis labels, and the Z-axis controls the size of text drawn as axis tick labels. Let me show you how these different types of arguments control the size of text in different parts of a plot. The title size slider specifies the argument to the Z-axis-main parameter. If it takes a value greater than 1, it enlarges the plot title. If it takes a value less than 1, it shrinks the plot title. And the label size slider controls the size of axis labels, while the axis size slider controls the size of tick labels. By default, the base graphics system produces axes with sensible labels and tick marks and sensible locations. If the axis does not look right, there are a number of graphical state settings specifically for controlling aspects such as the number of tick marks and the positioning of labels. For example, the MGP setting controls the distance between components of the axis and the edge of the plot region. It contains 3 values. The first element represents the positioning of the axis label. The second element represents the positioning of the tick mark labels, while the last element specifies the positioning of the line for the ticks. Let me move these 3 sliders to help you see their effects clearly. The axis title slider controls the first element, which specifies the distance between the axis label and the edge of the plot region. The second slider controls the distance between the tick mark labels and the edge of the plot region. And the third slider controls the distance between the line for the ticks and the edge of the plot region. There is another interesting parameter worth being discussed. It is this TCL parameter. It controls the length of the tick marks, with negative values specifying outward ticks, while positive values specifying inward ticks. In order to expand some of the facilities for customizing plots, it is necessary to describe more about the model underlying base graphics plots. In ARS base graphics, the graph area is split into 3 main regions. The first region is the plot region, which is a region within this bounding box formed by the axis. The second region is the figure margin region, which is used to draw components like axis, axis labels, tick mark labels, etc. And the third region is the outer margin region. And these 3 regions are arranged from inside to outside for a base graphics plot. One undesired aspect of the base plotting system is that all plots have large default margins. What if we want to reduce margin space and put more emphasis on the data elements of a plot? The base plotting system, in fact, allows us to customize the sizes of figure margins and outer margins with a graphical parameter function named PAR, short for parameter. Its MAR parameter specifies the size of figure margins and accepts a numerical vector to specify the sizes of margins starting from bottom and going clockwise to right. And the unit of these numbers is a line of text. Again, Let me move these sliders to help you see the effect. This slider controls the size of the bottom margin. Now I'm decreasing it. And this slider controls the size of the left margin. Let me increase it a bit. And this controls the size of top margin. Decrease it. And this one controls the size of the right margin. The parameter function has many uses. A noteworthy one is to combine multiple plots in a single graph. This can be done with the mfRow parameter, which allows us to set up a multi-panel grid of arbitrary dimensions and arrange multiple plots in this grid. In this example, I set up a 2x2 plotting grid and call the plot function 4 times to fill 4 plots in these panels. If you want to leave one panel empty, you can do so by creating an empty plot. This is done by specifying the type parameter to this character. And some additional work includes removing the axes and annotations in the figure margins. When we start filling these grid cells, the top left figure region is used first, and the figure regions along the top row are used next, from left to right, until that row is full. After that, figure regions are used in the next row down, from left to right, and so on. So figure regions in a plotting grid are filled by row. When there are multiple plots, this is how the 3 types of regions are arranged in a multi-panel grid. As you can see, there are no separate outer margin regions, and all figure regions are surrounded by a broader outer margin region. And we can use the OMA parameter to specify the size of this outer margin region along 4 dimensions, as we do with the MAR parameter. Now these settings affect all plots in this grid. As we saw from previous examples, the base graphics system enables us to exercise precise controls over virtually every aspect of a plot. It provides around 70 graphical parameters that can be set and tweaked, controlling things such as light style, colors, figure arrangement, and text justification, among many others, in all 3 regions. Here is a list of these graphic parameters. Most of these parameters, except a few read-only ones, can be set globally by this parameter function, which means parameters set by the parameter function will affect all plots in an R session or a code chunk in an R Markdown file. But these parameters can also be overridden by arguments to specific plotting functions. In this example, I first use the parameter function to set the color for tick mark labels to red. This setting takes effect in the first plot, but I override this parameter with a new value when creating the second plot. In this way, I can change the appearance of different parts of this plotting grid. The base graphics system follows a Panter's model, which means that graphics output occurs in steps. So creating a plot is just like a painter painting a painting, starting with a black canvas and adding items like we would add paint or ink to this canvas, with later items drawn on top of any previous items. In R-space graphics, a plot is created by first calling a high-level function like plot, bar plot, and histogram. These functions create a complete plot, and we can further decorate this plot incrementally by calling a set of low-level functions, such as points, lines, and rectangle, to add more graphics elements to an existing plot. And every call to a high-level function will wipe the canvas clean and then paint a new plot. And all low-level functions can only add outputs to the current plot. It is not generally possible to go back to a previous plot. Next, I'm going to give you several examples of low-level functions and show how we can use them to decorate an existing plot and make it more informative. Let's start with this call to the plot function. It creates a canvas initially populated with dozens of circles. Suppose we want to add a set of points to depict the underlying cubic polynomial relationship. Let's tick this checkbox. As a result, a set of red points are added, and the code used to create them is shown in this cell. It is a call to the points function, with the first two arguments specifying the x and y coordinates of these points, and the remaining arguments specifying their style. Suppose instead of points, we want to use a curve to depict the underlying relationship. Let's tick this checkbox. As a result, a curve is added. The code to create it is a call to the lines function. Because this curve is created by drawing a set of hidden points with line segments, the first two arguments to this call actually specify the x and y coordinates of these hidden points. Similarly, I can draw multiple curves, each with an offset from this existing curve. These functions can be called repeatedly to continue adding elements to the current plot. We can also add a straight line by specifying its intercept and slope with the AB line function. In this call, the named argument A represents the intercept, while the named argument B represents the slope. The AB line function can also be used to create horizontal and vertical lines. Here, the named argument H represents the location of this horizontal line. We can further use the text function to add some text and positions given by the first two arguments to annotate this plot. Then, and a rectangle with the rectangle function to highlight that relatively flat region. The first two arguments specify the coordinates for its bottom left vertex, while the following two arguments specify the coordinates for its top right vertex. Since this rectangle is colored, it covers up whatever came before. All additions to plots follow this layering rule. We can also create a polygon defined by its ordered vertices with the polygon function. When density is provided along with color, the color is no longer the filling color, but the color of shading lines. In the Panter's model, since later items are drawn on top of any previous items, when later items are shaded, they obscure previous items. In particular, those circles which are data elements of this plot. Then how can we get different layers working in our favor? We can change the order of drawing annotation components and data elements for a plot. Draw annotation components first and data elements later, so that data elements will reside on a higher layer. To do so, we need to create a canvas that only contains the axes and labels, and end points after this rectangle is drawn. But if you think this plotting order is not intuitive, you can choose to tune the transparency level of this rectangle with an RGB function. The RGB function takes 4 arguments. The first 3 arguments represent the red, green, and blue color channels, and the last argument represents the transparency level. Let me adjust it by moving this slider. As you can see, when this slider moves towards 1, the rectangle gets darker and darker. And when this slider moves towards 0, it gets lighter and lighter. You can also play with the other 3 sliders to adjust the levels of these 3 color channels. As you can expect, the best effect comes from using both techniques. As you can see from these examples, it is very often the case that a high-level plotting function does not produce exactly the final result that is desired. That's why we need low-level functions to control some fine details and add further output to a plot. In addition to elements intended for the plot region, the base plotting system also provides low-level functions for customizing components in figure margins. Here we are going to add a custom x-axis at the bottom with a color for tick mark labels different from that for the other axis lines. This is done by first setting this XAXT option to this character to suppress the plotting of the x-axis together with the remaining parts of this plot. Then we call an axis function to add the x-axis separately. The axis function can draw axes on any side of a plot by taking a side argument. The side argument can be a value from 1 through 4, counting clockwise from the bottom, specifying the side on which this axis is placed. So here, by setting the side argument to 1, we end the axis line at the bottom. And it also allows us to specify the location of tick marks along this axis and the text to use for tick labels. Here, I use this name argument add to control tick positions. And this sequence function gives a set of evenly spaced ticks. All ticks are pointing inward because we specify a positive number for this TCL parameter. And the base graphics system also provides the legend function for adding a legend to an existing plot. The legend of a plot helps identify different data elements in the plot. And its position can be represented by X and Y coordinates, or one of these four strings. And we can use this color parameter to control the colors of the legend keys, and in turn affects the colors used for their corresponding data elements in this plot. I would like to use this well-decorated plot to conclude the use of low-level functions in the base plotting system. Here I use a multi-panel grid to show the effects of several key intermediate steps. We start with an empty canvas created by this plot function call. Next, draw a polygon on this canvas to depict the boundary of data fluctuation, and then a rectangle to hide the region below a specific value, that is 0 here, and line segments to represent the true data fluctuation. And lastly, and the bounding box and axis lines to complete this plot. So we start our drawing with a blank canvas created by a high-level function, and add items to the canvas one by one using different low-level functions, and end up with this very sophisticated graph. And if we invoke adding of high-level functions after this, a new canvas will be created, and adding item created by subsequent low-level function calls will be added to the new canvas. But in fact, there's one way that you can add new data elements to an existing plot by using the plot function. That is, setting the new option of the parameter function to true. In this circumstance, the base plotting system will make the second plot on top of the first one. But you should do some additional work to make these two pieces look cohesive, including setting the axis of the second plot to false, and their labels to empty strings, and also making sure the axis ranges are equal between these two plots. So far, we've only talked about a single high-level plotting function, that is, this generic plot function. Next, I'm going to introduce several other high-level functions for drawing more specialized statistical plots. The first one is a histogram function for plotting histograms. A histogram investigates the distribution of a numerical variable, like the balance variable here. The default scale used by this function is a frequency scale, but it can be changed to the probability scale by setting this frequency option to false. Because the histogram function is an example of high-level plotting functions, the plot created by it can be incrementally enriched by items created by low-level functions. For example, we can add a line to denote the median of the values, and a rug to provide a one-dimensional view of this distribution, and add some text to annotate this plot. We can also change its title and axis labels. As demonstrated here. Instead of rug, a more useful visual companion for a histogram is a curve that depicts the density estimate of the variable. To add a density curve to a histogram, we need to first use the density function to produce a density estimate, and then plot this density estimate with line segments. Remember to set the frequency option to false so as to use the probability scale for this histogram. If we want to add a histogram to an existing plot, simply set the AND option to true. Also remember to make the later histogram transparent to prevent it from obscuring the early ones. The second specialized high-level function is the box plot function. Here, I use a built-in dataset named air quality to demonstrate its use. Air quality stores daily air quality measurements in New York, and all these measurements are numeric ones. So we can call the box plot function with the whole data frame directly to create multiple boxes, each describing one numerical variable through the quartiles of its values, as shown by this plot. Actually, the box plot function also makes it easy to plot distributions for grouped data. It can accept a formula object as an argument, specifying how a vector of numerical values should be split into groups according to a grouping variable. And since a formula argument only specifies the variables, we should use it with a data argument to specify the data set that contains these variables. In this example, you can see how we use a formula argument to plot the distribution of ozone levels for each month. The last specialized high-level function I would like to introduce is the bar plot function. A bar plot is a frequently used type of display that compares counts, frequencies, totals, or other summary measures for categorical variables. But it cannot work directly with a categorical variable. Rather, it works with some summary results derived from the categorical variable. Here, I first use the table function to find the counts of the distinct levels in variable default and student, respectively. The table function outputs a vector of length 2 for either case. And these two vectors are used by the bar plot function to plot the bars which make up the corresponding plots. This function also presents an option that allows us to draw bars horizontally rather than vertically. All right, this is all I would like to introduce for the base plotting system. In summary, the base plotting system uses a Panter's model to conceptualize the build-up of a statistical plot. We start with a blank canvas and then add things to it one by one. We kind of piece together this plot, and every little piece of the plot takes another line of code or another couple lines of code. So this is an intuitive model, especially when we are exploring data, because we may not know right away what's the plot that we want to make. And it allows us to quickly try different plotting options and see whether they work. And we are keeping track of all the code and eventually piece it all together. So the nice thing about the base plotting system is that it's very intuitive and convenient. But one of the drawbacks is that we cannot go back. So if we make a plot and add something to it, we cannot take it away. The cumulative process is sort of irreversible. And because every plot is just a bunch of R code, basically, it's difficult to describe how different graphical properties like color, marker type, line width, etc. tap into the data we are exploring, and thereby translate a plot to another person. Another drawback that I didn't list here is that because we have so much control over the system, we have to control everything, and therefore set everything very carefully if we don't like the default values. And this could be very tedious. So next time, we are going to introduce a fairly new graphic system, the ggplot2 system, which creates a language or grammar for describing different aspects of plot, and thereby allows us to describe a wide range of graphics with a compact and easy to use syntax.